What's good? Satoshi's mom here. I'm here with an absolute legend, Roger Dickerman, the creator, the founder of 24 Hours of Art. We were just talking just a second ago about how I really appreciate what you've done, and the respect that I think the space has for you is immense because of the energy that goes into what you've created with 24 Hours of Art, the amount of energy that goes into every single day, getting all of that information there for somebody like me to read it really quickly and easily. The project you've built behind that's helped fund it as well. I'd love to see it, man. And I really appreciate you being on today. Thanks for being here.
The respect is very mutual. You are a content machine right now. How are you doing it? How are you keeping up with that interview pace?
Dude, I literally have the same thing for you. Like, how are you doing it? I'll tell you on my end, like, honestly, like we were just saying, it kind of like these things are birthed from just it being a fun thing, a fun idea, not as much of like, hey, okay, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, like just knock things out. It really just came out of like, hey, I want to have conversations and, facilitate more thoughtful conversation in the space. And it started with one podcast with D's. And then next thing I knew, like, I was just like, okay, like I'm scrolling my feed, hitting people up like, hey, like I want to have you on the pod. Let's talk. And here we are, about 30 podcasts deep. And yeah, I mean, I'm doing it completely sponsor free right now. Haven't monetized it yet. I'm not really sure how to go about that, honestly. But it's completely pure right now and just conversation based, no ads or anything. We're going to see how it evolves and grows. But yeah, I mean, how about you? Like, how do you keep up with the pace of the art space and getting everything?
Well, real quick, before we go there, I want to tell you, I'm not sure if you're aware of a piece of my history, but we have more similarities than you might think. So very end of 2020, December 2020 into January 2021, right around the holiday season, I said publicly on X, I'm looking for an artist. I want to do I want to do a show. I want to foster. I love what you said. I want to foster conversation around here. We need more of that. We need more good, thoughtful content. And so Parrot ended up joining forces with me, and we launched NFT origin stories. And so what we would do there is we would go with a live stream a week and then an interview calendar. And so I ended up doing, I think, 67 one-on-one interviews over the course of 1 to 2 calendar years. I'm not quite sure when the show wrapped up. But anyway, I just wanted to say immense respect. We literally have a piece of our history is the same. So I know what that journey is like. I know what that journey is like when you do it out of love, when you do it out of pure passion, not monetized, just kind of out there doing the thing. You'll find it. The same way you're staying agile with the interviews, I feel like it'll put the pieces in place when the time comes.
Nice. That's great advice. And I really do appreciate that. Because, it's like navigating an unknown realm, but it really is for the excitement of getting to chat with people like you, getting to ask questions that I feel like normally, I wouldn't have the setup to be like, hey, like, let's talk for an hour with anyone. I mean, dude, even like a friend of mine, like, hey, like, let's meet up and talk for an hour. It's like, dude, I've got meetings, I've got this, I've got work. I mean, podcasting is so unique in that you actually are sitting down, phone away. Like you said before this, you're like, all right, I close the programs on my computer. Like, how rare is that to even have a conversation one-on-one without being on our phones nowadays?
Yeah, man, I can already tell you're very good at spontaneous conversation, which is my favorite kind. Not the prepackaged, here are your hits prior to the show. These are the 3 things I'm going to talk to you about. No, just let's get on. Let's have a great conversation, see where it goes. I firmly believe, I mean, listen, to each their own. There's great stuff that comes out of the other side too.
Right.
But I love the unstructured magic, finding it somewhere. I always say within like the 20th, 30th minute, you get on something, dude, you hit that flow state, and it's all history from there.
Dude, absolutely. You're so right about that. Like, once you're deep into the convo, like sometimes 45 minutes in, even that's when it really hits. And you're just like, it's just so fun. And like, you don't know what's going to come up and you don't know the idea. It's almost like a brainstorm.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Yeah. Super interesting. So you went through that already. What did you learn from that? Doing that for, you said 1 to 2 years.
I love it. It's why I try, even no matter how chaotic the time is. That's why when you reach out, it's an immediate yes. I love to, especially with those I respect who are in there doing things for what it seems like the right reasons and going about it thoughtfully. always, no matter how chaotic it gets, carve out a piece of your time to do that stuff, just to shut down the programs and focus and take a step back yourself. Sometimes I'll learn stuff within those conversations too. But I don't know. I mean, get better as the process goes on. Get just throwing yourself into the fire and finding the 45th minute magic. You just get better and better and better with those reps. And I think it's really fun. It's really important. And you come out the other side just, hey, I'm me. I'll go on a Spaces. I'll jump in an interview. I'll jump over here and do this. And I think that's a cool place to be, because I think public speaking of any kind is a fear factor for almost everyone. Like 98% of people probably have some element of a fear of speaking. And in fact, a lot of the people that I talk to, if they're not used to interviews, it's like coaching them through the initial stage. It's like, this is going to be fine. You know, oftentimes it's pre-recorded. If you say anything that you regret later, I'll just chop it out. Like, no worries whatsoever. You coach them through it, and you kind of condition yourself in the process.
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, like, I think a good thing about interviewing somebody who's really skilled at it, it's about relaxing the environment, like making it chill, making it comfortable, so that people can open up and, you know, talk about stuff and not feel nervous. I noticed that sometimes, like when I start an interview, whether it's even myself being a little nervous or the other person usually being like a little bit, I can tell, like, you know, kind of like as soon as I hit the button to record, like we'll chat a little bit beforehand, hit the button, and then it's kind of like, oh, like we're live now. And it, you know, it's about kind of being able to have the skill to be like, all right, like everything's cool, like let's talk. And then you see they relax, they get involved in it. And I think it's a beautiful thing.
Do you have a favorite interview so far?
Honestly,
I always say it's like not to the detriment of anyone else, but like what comes to your mind is like a special moment, a special time, a formative one.
you know, honestly, we've had a lot of really good ones. Off the top of my head, ones that I really enjoyed, Photon is Dead was a really, really deep one. I've listened back to it like 10 times, honestly. I enjoy listening back to them to glean more and more. I just interviewed Ayla El Musa, and she's incredible. Just, we could have talked probably for I don't even know how long. Her computer died, and that's how it actually ended the interview. That was incredible. And like, I really enjoy the conversations that are like a brainstorm in a sense, where I don't know, I feel like I'm getting out of that conversation incredibly energized. And I feel like my brain is just, you know, going with ideas of the potential, whether it's talking about our space or talking about like an idea, like a project idea or a creative idea. But man, like Zagabond was a really interesting one, getting to talk with him. OSF, talking about trading. Really learned a lot from him. I've listened back to that one a few times. And, you know, I'm probably forgetting some even off the top of my head. Jubbis J, we're about to drop his, really, really meaningful. I actually started tearing up during that one and like shed some tears on the pod. I don't know if anyone's going to be able to see that though or not, but, you know, like that was just from conversation, just got really deep. And I was like, damn, like some of the shit he was saying really was hitting. And yeah, you know, it is a vulnerable thing. It's an exciting thing. And I appreciate those questions. Those are really good questions. I can tell you're, you know, a good interviewer yourself.
And it's fun. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you know, what about you? Like your journey, like you went through that. Like, how did this all start for you? Like, when did you get involved in art, and when did digital art come into play for you? And how did it end up getting to this point?
I guess I have chapters now within. I used to frame time in the space as a chapter, and now I feel like I've had a few chapters within that chapter. So for me, that journey begins in 2020. I find NFTs first as a token of physical provenance in the summer of 2020. And very soon after, I realized, oh, there's this whole digital art market. I find a site called Nifty Gateway, and I see at the time all this crazy stuff beginning to happen. Now, I find it just prior to Beeple's first release, which is the key fun moment that we can get back to in a moment. But I find it just before that. I remember lying on my back in bed with a phone, attempting to click and buy the $1 Beeple politics is bullshit. And of course I failed. You know, it's first come, first serve. And I didn't realize at the time you had to be quick And so I just click. I'm like, yeah, this would be cool. Click, nope. And then fast forward just 5 days later, and I collected my first NFT. That was Slime Sundays, The Last Stand of the Nation State. It was a $40 open edition at the time. But I really, in that moment, while I thought the art was cool, I saw NFTs as a theoretical marketplace, as a trading vehicle. Within literally 3 months, and fast friendships, and those 3 months feel like a calendar year for sure. All of a sudden, I kept thinking to myself, oh, let me set this artwork aside for a vault. I probably didn't even call it a vault then, but just this idea of, oh, I'm not necessarily interested in trading this. I want to put that over here, right? And start to build something that matters. 3 months later, and a lot of friendships later, I thought, no, I want to be here. Like, this is where I want to be. This is where I want to plant my flag, and let me rearrange my life to put myself fully into this space. And so in May of 2021, well, actually, we just talked about NFT origin stories. So something I started to do for fun was that. And so started to do all these interviews, these early interviews. Fuckrender was interview number 1. He was one of my first artist friends in the space. The late, great A Lot of Money is an interview I'll never forget. That was interview number 4. And just doing those changed me. It changed my brain. It changed my passion. It redirected me. In May of 2021, I launched a company called Artifex at the intersection of digital fine art and 3D modeling. And so with art director Dirk at work, we collaborate with an artist. And so we've had a ton of amazing ones. Mentioned Fuckrender, A Lot of Money, Coldy, Victor Mascara, Raf Grassetti, Blake Catherine, and so many more. Collaborated with almost 50 people. But essentially, they create a one-of-one artwork. We collaborate to create a 3D object that represented the central figure, character, object within that artwork, and that would become an addition. But at the time, we felt like we were moving rapidly into some metaverse world. Now, some people may LOL now at that, but at the time, you saw all of these. You saw crypto voxels pop up and Decentraland, and all sorts of these interesting takes on it. And it was very relevant. And I think now, today, years later, we're starting to see the rise of maybe a more advanced form of that, maybe eventually a more permanent form of that. And that's fascinating. So that certainly kept me occupied for several years. Still have Artifex, consider it sort of the collaborative art lab, but it's going to be a longer term journey because, of course, then we go into an art bear, right? A slower time. Everyone's sort of gut checking themselves. Do I want to stay in this space? Can I stay in this space? How much time can I devote to it? And I asked myself all the hard questions and came out with the same answer. I want to do this. This is where I want to be. And so I was experimenting, and this is the summer of 23. That's when 24 Hours of Art hits. And that started as an experiment. And now, of course, fast forward a bit, has become a lot more than that. But feel free to poke at any of that.
Wow. I mean, man, so the craze of NFTs, it was so addictive. It was so exciting. It was so when it first popped off, really, which was that late 2020, early 2021, I was in the same boat. I was like, all right, this is where I want to be. I'd sold my business that I had been working on for a long time, went all in on NFTs, and I loved the trading aspect. I loved the collecting aspect. I loved how it literally represented what I loved as a kid, collecting Pokemon cards and Mighty Beans and Crazy Bones and all that shit. And doing that online just instantly clicked. So getting into NFTs was very similar. I just wanted to be involved. And I love to see that you're so passionate about that as well, because this is what I consider to be a digital art renaissance, an art renaissance in a sense. It's very exciting. It's very fun. And seeing something birthed from that in such an organic way is so cool, because what you're doing is you're really pushing the space forward in your own unique way that feels incredibly right to you in an organic way. And, I'm curious, how long and how much energy are you putting in on a daily basis into these recaps? What is your day to day like when it comes to these?
I'm up between 4 and 5. If everything is in rhythm, on rhythm, it's closer to 4 or at 4. For a while there, when I didn't have my efficiencies down, it had to be at 4 or even 3:45, right? I had to get started right away. Process takes about 3 to 4 hours. So again, in it 4 to 5, I'm going around. I have my sort of en masse checklist. I would say the magic of what I do is not automatable, right? There is a portion of what I do that I can go out to the aggregators, and I can sort of have a storehouse of collections, and I can kind of know what I'm looking for. But anybody could do that, right? If they cared to. The other side of it, I call like the 10% or the 20%, the magic is the stuff that there's a private sale, or there's a cultural conversation going on, or there's a trade that happened that would be sort of impossible to know otherwise, or there's a contextual quote, or there's a piece of an interview that I can go out and grab. Like, that's the magic of it. And so some days there may be no magic. Some days it's more, hey, this was a day. And other days it may feel all magic, and there's multiple headlines and multiple pieces of context that I find essential to the bigger picture. And so by, let's say, between 8 and 9 a.m., we have a final report. It goes out as a newsletter. The newsletter is every single link, more images. I put a few closing thoughts in there at the end. Some days I write like a little, like a real take. Other days it's more of a throwaway, just I have nothing else to add here. Just it all speaks for itself. And then I take that and I make it a digitally native post on X and then push it out there. So I have a stable newsletter reader base, but then a lot of the engagement side of it and a lot of where I spend the rest of my day will be on X, and will be with a lot of the people who interact there. And I'd be remiss not to mention the final piece of the puzzle, which is definitely not the last piece, right? Maybe the piece that dominates the most of myself. It's the collective. So we have 24 Hours of Art collective. Right. We did sort of release, everyone has a day, meaning, okay, let me go back to the day. So 4 to 5, 8 to 9, release the newsletter, release the X post, release the X post in the Telegram to the collective. A little bit later in the day, work with an artist full time. His name is Justin Wetch. He's not only an artist, but he's a technical wizard. And so I put a creative brief together. What were the key events of the day? So there's a little curation that's required there. And our goal is to create a design. It's like an ART design. We have the art iconography at the center of the frame. And we build in between 1 and 3 art pieces that represent the day, but they interact in what we feel is an interesting manner. So we have a creative brief. Justin gets to work. We iterate back and forth. And then later in the day, we release the definitive ART design that sort of represents the key events that took place in the prior 24-hour period. And the collective that we have, everybody owns a day, and only one person owns a day. So let's say, today, let's say Halloween, October 31st, right? When we wake up on October 31st, somebody in the 24 Hours of Art collective knows that I have October 31st, and they can go through that entire day and say, oh my gosh, like that X copy artwork sold today. I wonder if that, I wonder how that might be infused into the ultimate design. And then we have the reveal the next day. And it's been a very fun process, day over day over day, now more than 300 days into the year.
Wow. So how many pieces are in that collection? Is it just 365?
So I did 24 honoraries at the end of 2023. So you might imagine when I first experimented with 24 Hours of Art in summer of 2023, and then several months into it, I was spending 4+ hours a day on the totality of this process. And I thought, I need to get out of really serious about this and figure out how it makes sense to do this, because I am enjoying it and it's getting a great response, or I need to stop, right? And the goal was, okay, let's put the mental model together and let's see if there's something sustainable here, right? And that's where the Ultimate Collective comes from, which was launched later that year. So the first token ever is December 11th, 2023. It was called The First One. And we did an auction for that token solely. And Chikai, he's the first one. Chikai won that auction.
Nice.
And then there were 23 honoraries. So there were many people that I spoke to for advice. Hey, I'm thinking about doing something here. What do you think? And I got all sorts of amazing advice. And I wanted to honor those people. And a lot of the people that I spoke to, I reached out to. These weren't the honoraries where you just pick a bunch of famous people and like drop it into their wallet. This was all spoken to beforehand. Hey, you mean something to this process. You mean something to 24 Hours of Art. Can I honor you in this way? and only after they said yes, then they became part of that pool. So there's 24 initial tokens, and then this is a leap year, so there's 366 in the calendar year of 2024. Right. So if you go to that collection now, you'll see 390 tokens. So it's the 24 honoraries, right, and then the 366.
So then will there be another mint for 2025?
You're trying to get me to drop some initial alpha.
I mean, if you're comfortable with it.
Yeah. There will be, but it won't look the same. And that's very important to me. So there are a couple things that are really important. I'm here for the long haul. Does that guarantee anything? Of course not. You need to execute, right? You need to push things forward, and you need a little luck along the way. But I am here for the long haul. So anything that I'm doing, any decision that's made, is ideally for the benefit of the whole and the benefit of this thing being here in 3, 5, 10 years down the road, right? And then we cross our fingers and we go for it. And so premise number one, the current collective, which has made up so much of my year, needs to be supported. And so the way that I'm supporting the current collective is if somebody retains their 2024 token, their design, their ART iconography, they're in. So that they persist. They don't get kicked out, right? They don't get booted out of the collective just because, let's say, the calendar year turns to 2025. So number one, so take care of your own, right? The people who were there from day one or some point along the way, or anyone who picked up a token, right? So support the collective. Then two, what does 2025 mean? Where are we in the process? How big should a collective be? Where should we sort of draw that line in the sand? That's a very interesting question. Because on one hand, you want to say, oh, sure, like if someone wants to be in, I want them to be in. But again, it goes back to there's a value there, there's an access there, there's a pre-built group, pre-built group there. How do you make that decision, right? And so what we're working on literally right now, real time, with 2 full months still to go in this calendar year, is how do we take care of premise one, support the initial collective, while tastefully allowing, right, the next portion of people, if they should want to come in and to be a part of such a thing. It won't look the same, but we're still making those final decisions on exactly how to roll that piece out.
Yeah, because the art, like seeing it from an outside perspective without the knowledge of how it's being made, it's like, how is he doing this? Like, it looks so like it's not low effort by any means. Like, even looking at the pieces, your background on this call, it's so high effort. Like, it's amazing. It actually is like such a sick art piece that also represents the historical relevance of that day. So, like, to just reiterate, the people that have the token, they have a date on their token. So yep. Some of those are unrevealed, essentially.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
And eventually, this chapter of 2024 will close. The 390 tokens will all be revealed by December 31st, 2024. Or rather, January 1st, because the next day you reveal the token from the day prior. Is that right?
That's right. Exactly right.
Nice. Very cool.
I'm glad you highlighted the art, because it's not, listen, we see so much in thumbnail form,
right,
in scroll fashion, where you don't know, and sometimes it's like a layer of an onion. I believe in brands with layers, and I'm trying to build that. We have some lore. We're stacking up some lore, and Justin is an incredibly talented artist, and so every day that one person who owns that date gets the best of me and the best of Justin. And essentially every day, handmade, built in 3D. So this is not, and listen, no
AI.
No shade there.
Right.
AI, there's some incredible AI art out there, but I do believe AI art sometimes comes with a connotation. Right. And the connotation is sometimes, they clicked the button, they prompted it, and it's low effort. Now, that is definitely not the case, and you could speak to a ton of the leading AI artists, and they will quickly disprove that. But for this piece and how we handle it, Justin is building these pieces. He's building a 3D scene in Houdini. Go into town, and it's multiple iterations, oftentimes, between us, until we get to that final product that we feel best represents that day. So there's dimensionality. When you get the high-res version of this ART, you could zoom in there, and there's a couple qualitative factors that I want people to key in on. It's like, one, can you recognize the artworks? we want at least some recognizability of the main piece or pieces that are represented. It's like, oh, on this day, I don't know. Do you know any of these pieces behind me?
Oh yeah, tons of them. I was looking at it. I mean, you could see the X copy one of 666 stands out right away. The Lewis Daisy, my keyboard. There's so many. I mean, there's a lot of my keyboard on this one. Actually, it looks like Beeple. I mean,
Yeah.
man.
Okay. So when you zoom in, you could see a couple of the artworks that are on it. Then if you zoom in closer, the report text is actually on there, and it's expressed.
Is that what that is?
That's what that is. So
Wow.
it's if the goal is when you zoom out, you're just sort of getting a reflection of the day and the pieces. You zoom all the way in.
Beeple piece.
This is politics is bullshit.
Politics bullshit. Yeah, I can tell by the emoji.
Yeah. And you get all the way in there, and there's literal report text that's written into the design. So you can get pretty much as deep as you want to go into that day. The goal is that day's token will give that to you. And thinking about now, we have more than 300 of these just within the calendar year stacked up. The lore is starting to feel real. It's starting to feel like, wow, we're putting something together here that hopefully matters and hopefully stands the test of time. And hopefully someone who's looking back years later can go to those days. We call it like the tapestry of the year. They can scan the tapestry of the year and be like, oh yeah, that's the day when ... happened, and immediately get that memory capture and then go as far into it as they want.
Is the token also linked to the report?
Ultimately, it will be. Yeah. So we're actually using a token type called the 7160. This Transient Labs partner.
Right.
Yep. We were the second release out of the gate after All Seeing Seneca's Perils of Sese to use the 7160. So it was something that was really important to us. And essentially what that allows us to do is we can slide in something new to the token holders array anytime we want. So we've had some fun with that. We've done some surprise and delights. Fun fact, Die with the Most Likes was the first person to homage. We had this period of time where a number of artists were homaging the ART. They were taking the ART and they were doing something fun with it. And Die with the Most Likes triggered that the day after the mint opened. And we woke up the next day. We didn't talk. There was no pre-planning to this. I woke up the next day. I scrolling social media and catching up because we were hot and heavy in the heat of the mint. And there it was. And it was a good meat ART, unprompted. It was amazing. So fun fact, Die with the Most Likes is part of the 24 Hours of Art Collective. He bought a token. And I reached out to him and I said, hey, each token type is a 7160, the array. Can we put your design in your token so that your token will have the blank canvas, your good meat ART homage, and then the ultimate days design? So you now have a trifecta and you can toggle among them anytime you want. Of course, he was game. And then we said, not only that, but we're going to do a fun meat design, right? Just to homage your homage. And we did a raffle of all token holders, and OG Crooked West came out on top. And so he has our homage, which is like literally a marbled steak in the ART with Die's handwriting of good meat in the background. And it's just like all these fun layers that we're having a blast as the year goes on.
Man, I mean, shout out to OG. He was just on the pod, hasn't been released yet, but that's another one off the top of my head. Like, dude, that was an amazing conversation. Incredible individual. Absolutely love that guy. Die with the Most Likes too. I love how he also is like historically preserving the space in his own way too, through his daily GMs being relevant to what has happened the day prior, essentially.
Yep.
So really cool how it's all fitting in. And I love the historical preservation of what you're doing. I think it's so important. Like, who's going to preserve the history of this space? Like, if we don't do it, people who care, no one will do it. Like, it's not just going to happen. And you've done this now for all of 2024 and some of 2023, I guess, but through the honoraries. But overall, like, looking back at this, say 50 years from now, I love the idea of being able to see it in art form and also in text long form. But then, like, you know, are there any plans to try to preserve it any way, like with using on-chain mechanics or anything like that, to make sure that, like, because I'm guessing you're using Arweave, right?
Yeah.
To preserve the token.
Yep. So we want all of it on chain, and we're just kind of working towards, hey, what's the best way to accomplish that? And that can evolve. Like, quite frankly, I think everyone's perspective on this is evolving. What we want to do is be aware of the time and place, be aware of best practices, you know, pick the lane that fits best, and be willing to pivot that along the way for the benefit of what this all is. One of the most important things that we started to do recently, and I think this kind of tips off where I want to take this, we started rolling up information. So the day-to-day from, you know, a provenance, this happened, plant your flag, milestone design, all that makes sense. It's our bottom brick. I call it the bottom brick of 24 hours of art, right? So it doesn't exist without that. That's what it is. But now, how does that information become even more valuable? I'm interested in rolling it up. And so I'm interested in rolling it up where I'm aware someone who reads 24 hours of art today, if they get into those line items, you start seeing a lot of ETH numbers, a lot of dollar numbers flying around. How do you make a rhyme or reason of that, right? If someone's coming in from outside the space, that's very hard to do. It's okay, cool. What's a 1 of 1 of X, right? So I'm aware there's still a learning curve there to understand how a 24 hours of art report is structured. 2 months ago, I kicked off the digital art market report, and what that is a roll up. So that's 2 months. Right now, it's bi-monthly, so it's 2 months of information. The charts and the pure numbers are at the back. It's a glossary. If someone wants to go back there and geek out, I do, right? You can go back there and you can pour over all the intricacies and the numbers. But up front, and what can theoretically meet a much wider readership and people trying to learn about digital art in the first place, are stories. And I think stories make the world go round. Contextualization makes the world go round. And that's my next step. It's 24 hours of art. It's our next step to helping grow, right? We want to be a growth engine for this. And so we'll tell the story about what Snowfro did with the last squiggle. And this coming report, which the next bi-monthly is going to kick off in just about a week. And one of those stories that's coming out actually a little bit sooner, and this is a very relevant date coming up, it's Beeple's 4-year anniversary. And it's a presidential cycle. The first release, politics is bullshit, crypto is bullshit. Now we're 4 years later. Beeple's in a much different place. His digital art is in a much different place. The space is in a much different place. So I actually went out and grabbed 8 personalities who have been involved with his journey along the way. Co-founder of Nifty Gateway, collector of his first 2 1-of-1 artworks, Pablo Fraile, and a host of others. I won't spoil them all. But got 8 personalities to tell an oral history of how it all happened 4 years ago and how we came to present day. I want anyone to be able to read that and to be able to get excited about that. And ideally for that to be maybe a little bit of an on-ramp to get involved with things, you know, outside of that story.
Wow. That's super cool. And are these long form or are they more bits and pieces, like short, punchy?
Right now, the format of a digital art market report, it's 12 stories, one of them being produced by a content contributor. So it's somebody, not me, right? I write the majority of it, but I thought it was nice to have, you know, a flavor outside of myself. So I invite one person in per report. The last one, for example, the first report was Steve, the head of curation at Virtu Fine Art. He wrote a fantastic piece about Joe Pease. I'll keep the secret about who the next contributor is, but the goal is to bring one outside voice in, tell 12 stories in long form. That can be anywhere from a page or 2 to this Beeple story that will likely be 10 plus. And then we have a milestone section, 24 milestones of that 2-month period. Think of it like little mini paragraphs. This happened on this day, this happened on this day, just little contextualization. And then we have the glossary section with the full tables of top sales across 1-of-1s, 1-of-1 of X's, and additions.
Powerful. And also shout out to Steven Santoro, another absolutely brilliant mind who, honestly, I'm surprised that more people are not just absolutely knowing who this guy is. I think he is still, like, you know, when he shares his takes, they're always so on point. And I have so much respect for him. He was also on the pod. And I still think, too, that he's like even early on in his journey of this space, as we all are in a sense, how the space is so new. It's just super cool, like how it's all interwoven, what you've done. A lot of really respectable individuals all contributing here. And it really is kind of cool. It's heartwarming too. Like this is our space that we all know and love. I mean, like, yes, there's a ton of gambling and, shit posting and all of that though interweaves into it. Like, and I guess that kind of leads me to ask you, like, how do you feel the space has evolved and matured since the NFT craze in 2021 leading to 2022? Like, people now are more so gambling with meme coins, but like when you take a step back, you kind of realize that, like, are we artists in the NFT space as much as we are creators of PvP opportunities? Like, early on, NFTs were just a way for people to PvP. And we were looking at it as art, and especially, one of one art obviously is different, but, larger scale collections. Like, it was a way for people to appreciate art, but also it's like an opportunity for PvP. So are the best creators who drive the most volume simply really good at creating PvP opportunities? Obviously, the art is important because that's what it represents, the token itself. But how do you see that we've evolved and matured as a space since then? Because I do feel things are different now.
It's a great question. Couple thoughts. One, 2020 into 21, the space was everything. Like, everything was encompassed in the space. It could hold everything. It felt cozy.
Yeah.
And you had art, and you had metaverse and sort of land tokens, and you had a few game tokens, and you didn't even have PFPs yet other than CryptoPunks, right? And some of those older examples of whatever you want to call them, whether you consider them PFPs or hybrids or whatever. That's what we had. And you could know everything, and you could be everywhere. And when you talk to somebody, you could pivot around and talk about, again, this small, cozy little space where all of a sudden when people were onboarding, everyone, it was up only for everyone involved, and you could know everything. Then in early 2021, as we get into the Bored Ape zone, which took place in April of 2021, now things are accelerating. And one of the topics of conversation at the time was, I can't know everything. A lot of people were going through this. A lot of people had these sort of like identity crises of, wait a second, I missed that. How could I miss that? But it was just because everything was growing. Everything was getting nuts and crazy and fast and high stakes. And the space began what I think has been a continuous process of fracturing. I think on one hand, the art market can feel slow. And when something feels slow, it feels smaller. But I don't think it is smaller. We have more creators today than we've ever had before. You may have some of those creators who aren't producing anything today, but more creators are onboarded to blockchain technology and digital art ownership than have ever existed before. That's just factual, right? Even the collector side, even if it's slow, even if active wallets is lower, it's still a vastly larger space than it was at that period of time, even if some of the individual dollar numbers per token per specific token don't match up. I think it's very important. And so what's happening is things are fracturing. I can't keep up with gaming tokens. In fact, you could present to me a list of game-associated blockchain-based tokens that I would have no idea existed today. Same thing with the PFP space. PFP space may not be hot, but there's still stuff going on there today. I have no idea. Multi-chain, L1, L2, low cost out there on Zora and Rodeo and all sorts of different places, right? And so things are fractured. I think you brought up another interesting thing. PvP. I think we have these really interesting artists and a lot of people, not just artists, right? A lot of people, right, sort of creating these types of PvP opportunities. But let's just stick with the art lane.
Right.
You have artists who are really good at that. But I think you also now have artists, because the space is fractured and because I don't believe it is just about PvP, you have a lot of artists who are just doing their thing apart from creating PvP-based mechanics, right?
Yes.
They're just doing their thing. And does that mean, maybe they'll sell for a little less? Maybe their growth trajectory will be a little bit slower, but they're playing a much different game. And it's a long-term game called art. And I think that's the crux of it. We're heading to a place, we already are, but really we're heading to a place where this is just art. In the same way that someone holds a canvas, they own a digital artwork. this technology is damn good at providing a consensus marketplace, really the first real consensus marketplace to own a digital artwork. And digital artists are talented, and they're just artists at the end of the day. And you need that ownership mechanism if they want to relate to a collector base. And you see plenty of those artists just sort of carving out these sustainable, part-time, full-time, in-between careers. And I think that's where things get very, very fun.
Yeah, and I think that's like kind of where we're at right now. Like we're starting to see it branch, because the skill set of creating a PvP opportunity, which drives volume and usually would lead to selling out the collection in the case of however it's designed, is one route. But, you know, I do believe that if there is a bit of a degenerate twist, you will, as far as inside of an artist's work, you will see more volume just as of right now.
No
you know,
question.
Yeah, it's just plain and simple. And then, you know, removing that entirely, though, attracts a different kind of appreciator. And I think there's more art appreciators now than ever, because the opportunity that we had in 2021 with NFTs, that's something that attracted people into digital art. But a lot of those people left because they got burned from buying the top of Bored Apes or whatever. So insert any NFT there. But the people that remain now in the space are truly art appreciators. Numbers are down, but you know, people are here, they're active. And if you don't look at the numbers, but you look at the vibe, people are actually, I think, more bullish than ever on appreciating art for art. It's still very early. And you know, that could be a hot take and people could agree with it or disagree with it. But I think that right now we're at this kind of fork in the road for what people think of as NFTs and what we think of as digital art. So it's interesting to hear your take on that, because I think we're in a very unique position that, you know, a year from now, I think we're going to be not calling it NFTs as much as we call it crypto art or just art.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's very interesting. I'm fascinated with PvP. I love trading. I've been enjoying the meme coin craze, losing money, making money. You know, still making art myself and, you know, putting it out there with really zero expectation of what, you know, I mean, nowadays you're putting out art for an art appreciator who comes by and collects. And it's not as like, okay, boom, like it's selling out instantly. But I don't think that art has ever sold out instantly like this for emerging artists. It's like we got really kind of used to the way that things were. And now we look down on like, you know, artists not selling out instantly. And I think that normalizing not selling out instantly is kind of a part of our healthy growth as well. So yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that, but
I'm with you.
yeah,
I agree with you. I don't think that, I mean, listen, selling out instantly, of course, hey, who wouldn't want that, right? If they were given like an A, B option, but at the same time, some people are outright designing releases to not sell out instantly, deliberately, so that, you know, as days, weeks, months, and years go on, that there are things there for people to find after the fact. And I remember even Nifty Gateway, which, you know, became the epicenter. It's baked in my brain because I'm telling a story about it. But it's a fun place to go back to, and it was the epicenter of the universe from late 2020 through mid 2021 for sure. But from early Nifty Gateway days, earlier in the year 2020, you had plenty of releases that hadn't sold out. And one of the most fun things to happen when all of a sudden all the attention was there, and Beeple was there, and Ferocious was there, and Trevor was there, and all these artists were being onboarded in real time, you had a number of collectors who would go back and they would say, what were the releases that came before these that may be out of my access point, you know, just all the rage? And they would go back and they would say, oh, interesting, the first release on Nifty Gateway was this, and this came early, and oh wow, there's still these to be minted. And then you'd see these surges of these early releases all of a sudden minting out a year plus after the fact. And I think that's it's very fun. And then another counterexample, you see artists just slowly and methodically, right, continuously releasing these little batches and one at a time. And it's like the opposite of FOMO, but it works for them, and it's creating very, very stable and sustainable collector bases.
So, this lets me kind of lead to another question, because you obviously are seeing a lot of these trends play out. You're so deeply involved in them, recording them, understanding them. From like a subconscious understanding, I want to ask you, what do you think leads to emerging artists or artists in general that are having success in the market right now, attracting art appreciators, selling their works, selling out collections, or having great one-of-one sales, focusing on the success side of it? Obviously, there's like the fulfillment side for an artist, creating for the sake of creating, but really looking at it like art, in these cases, this is the career for some of these artists. A lot of artists have pivoted to be part-time during these kinds of waves of the market. Respect to all artists putting their work out there and being vulnerable. What do you think makes these artists stand out? The ones that are selling out, the ones that are attracting these collectors who are like, hey, like I want to own this person's artwork. I believe in them long term.
Yeah, I think from just a real talk perspective for artists out there, if they're coming to participate, like we're not in an art bull, and a lot of people have this like cyclical mindset. It may never feel like an art bull, and what we're going through right now may be the present and future reality of it, which is that the bar is raised and things are generally slower, and you could see the anomalies trip off. Either they've been designed extraordinarily well, or the work is extremely qualitative, but things are just generally slower right outside of that. And so I think real talk for an artist, the current time and place we're in requires thoughtfulness about two things. One, the communication side of it. It's inextricably linked to the success of the art. You might want the art to speak for itself. You may be able to find an anomaly where it does speak for itself, but the more common reality is you have to go to bat for your art. And you may not like that. It's an entirely different skill set, oftentimes, than creating the art itself. And I think that's what's very frustrating for certain artists. It's like, really, I have to take X amount of hours out of my day, out of my craft, to develop a new craft that involves going into X or into Telegram or into Discord or into private chats or what have you, or going to live events. And I really have to just do that over and over and over again to ensure that my art lands and catches eyes. And that's just the reality of it. There is a sales aspect of even the finest art out there. Now, is there a situation you can show me where 100 years later it wouldn't matter and the cream of the crop of the art rises to the top? I'm sure there will be an artwork that's viewed as a masterpiece that wasn't communicated about initially, but I think it goes an awful long way. And I think it's just a reality of the situation. And then there's the mechanics side. I think mechanics matter. And I think that there are mechanics that work in the short term. And I think there are mechanics that work in the mid and long term. And I think there are very few things that may work in sort of all terms. But you see artists out there experimenting, and that's also a different skill set to understand market mechanics and supply and demand, and why a collector or why a collector group is behaving in a certain sort of way. Not take it personally when someone dumps your work, not getting too high when someone pumps your work up. It's very, very difficult. But I would say it's those two things. It's understanding that time and place we're in, we're so linked to socials, we're so linked to communication that it's just a part of the art at this stage. And then the mechanics, that the supply and demand does matter. Yes, there's the unicorn that is Xcopy, but it is not an example, right, that really works for the majority. I want everyone to use the example of Xcopy for the understanding that you don't have to sell out initially, that an artwork can start, a lot lower cost, and then your career can be in an entirely different place 4 years later. Use it for all the productive side of the Xcopy examples. But some of the blanket statements like supply doesn't matter because of Xcopy, I think that takes it to a very tough place. It's not one size fits all. You're going to find some very smart people that say supply matters an awful lot. You're going to find some very smart people that say it pays to be prolific. And you can't just blindly go with one or the other. It has to be a situation that fits your mindset. And the last thing I'll say there, and I know I'm jumping all over the place, but speaking of like fits your mindset, something that concerns me lately, we've seen like the fourth or fifth or sixth season of the same thing expressed across artists. And I will call it like the open edition / meme coinsies. They're the same thing. And I like how you sort of bucketed things as like PvP mechanics, and you know, it sort of incentivizes liquidity and trading at a much higher level than certain other things. I think certain artists, like very few, are built for it. Like they are built for it. You could just see it. They're just, the internet is their home. Their art is great, but it's almost like they're even better at navigating the chaos. And I would put Dark Farms forward as someone who's just like at home, comfortable, convicted. I could go on and on. I think it's a beautiful thing to witness. And that's like the rarefied air. It's like 0.1% of artists. Then there's another category that can handle it. They're not necessarily like the Hall of Fame Dark Farms category, but they can handle it, and they can put themselves in the position, get through it, deal with some of the blows that might come your way by you know, being involved in some of those things. What really concerns me is the other categories. And this, because they're in these categories, doesn't make them bad or bad artists or bad people or whatever. It's hard. Like being in a PvP atmosphere, especially when it's attached to your image and your artwork, is really difficult. It can be taxing. It can be draining. At its worst, you'll hear examples about death threats and DMs and all sorts of nonsense that none of us would ever want to be a part of, but is real. I've seen artists in 2021 that were friends and are not back. They are not here. And they're incredible artists. They have incredible art. They are real artists. They're real digital artists and real artists. And they're not here anymore. And I know that like this next phase, meme coin is an open edition, as a meme coin, it's all kind of like in the same category of speculative art related engine. We're going to lose some people, and that sucks. So, you know, just a message. It's like, make sure what you do feels right for you. And that's it. Anyway, rant over, my friend.
Yeah, dude. I mean, a lot of really, really good stuff there. Like, you know, for the artists that are in the Dark Farms category, like that's, you know, kind of the anomaly in a sense. Those people are like very few and far between who can handle the insane onslaught of public opinion from all angles and allow yourself to continue forward with the same vision, not be wavered, not give up. And then the people who do kind of deal with it, but aren't like as efficiently navigating that in an athletic way, I guess you can even think of it. And then the people who are out there and who don't know how to deal with it.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think since it is such a core part of our space, it is very important to understand that like you can't bend over backwards, whether it's for a collector, whether it's for a speculator. You have to have a core vision and really nail it to the board in front of you and be like, look, this is my hill. Like I'm going for this. And if you're not happy with it, or if things change, you have to also be transparent, but never be the person. And I will say this continuously, never be the person that's apologizing to everybody for what you initially did. You have to own up to whatever it is that you've done, whether it's make a collection that, you know, goes viral and then goes to zero. Like that happens. You can't control it all. And people ask you endlessly, what are you going to do? I mean, you know, there's all these different categories and caveats. But I think ultimately at the end of the day, if you're really just not going to apologize and try to appease everybody, you will gain everyone's respect in this space in a weirdly counterintuitive way. People, like a really good example that I give of this is Kevin Rose, who, you know, had insane success, not even just in NFTs, but just in life, in business, and building all these different businesses, selling them, making grand amounts of money. The success of, you know, life in that realm, translating it to NFTs, creating moonbirds, the whole 9 yards, right? But then, you know, he started getting sick because of these death threats, because of the intense pressure from the public. And yeah, I remember seeing a tweet from Daniel Got Hits, who I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he said this funny thing, and I think about it whenever I bring this up. He said, if Kevin Rose would have instead been like, hey, like, screw you guys, thanks for the free yacht. Like, I literally am living my best life now, and it's because of you bozos. Instead of being like, hey, like, I'm so sorry, guys. Like, I don't know what to do about the price. Like, people are constantly hitting me up. I have ulcers now. I have to go take ketamine therapy, and shout out to Kevin Rose for, going through all of that. I mean, I'm not trying to talk down on him in any way, but more so using it as an example of what could happen if you start going this route of apologizing to everybody instead of really owning it up to it, like Frank DeGods, right? Frank from DeGods is another example where he has owned all the things he's done, all the experimentation, and people will like him or hate him. But ultimately, at the end of the day, he's still here. He's still building, still doing stuff. And it's because he has a unapologetic way of doing things. And I think that's key in this space. As an artist, whether at any level or as a PvP creator, especially, I think it's really important to unapologetically just create, do the things you want to do, but don't try to screw people over, of course, and don't do things in a way that you're trying to be malicious or, black hat or anything like that. But I guess the moral of it all is like, look, like if you're going to be in this space, it's not for the weak-hearted. Like you really do have to have a mission and you have to believe in yourself and not waver. And if you do need to pivot, you have to just do it. You can't be apologetic. You have to instead really just be like, I know where I'm going. Yeah, this didn't work. Yeah, I did this. And you can't hide from all this stuff, of course, because it's on the blockchain. It's transparent. And our reputation at the end of the day is the most important thing that we build here. So, yeah, I mean, I guess that's kind of another rant to attach on at the end.
So I think that's such an important rant. And the word that comes to my mind is conviction. Like the conviction is so attractive, and it's even more attractive. It's attractive in life in general, but it's more attractive in the Wild West. Like in the Wild West, where people are going through bouts of uncertainty on a daily basis, right? Like likely when they're looking at maybe a certain cryptocurrency or digital artwork or what have you, whatever people are interested in, there's so much uncertainty, and people are like probabilistically betting on things. And some days are dark and some days are, are very bright. So when someone outside of yourself has conviction in something, it's a very attractive quality. And the exercise that I give to people, I think goes hand in hand with exactly what you were saying. And especially an exercise that I'd recommend to any artist, founder, creator, creative of any kind, is when you want to release something or even take a very important step, have your why, like you're literally, why am I doing this? Have it be strong enough that if the thing goes belly up and is a total flop, that a week later, somebody could come back to you and say, hey, why did you do that? And even say it in like a super dickish way, right? Like they're condescending and they're like, how could you do that? Put yourself in that position just for 10 seconds. And if you believe that you would have, hey, I did it for these reasons. They were clear then and they're clear now. And it may have not worked out, but I can still coherently tell you why, even though you're being condescending to me. If you can sort of pass that like why test, do the damn thing, do it well, do it with maximum conviction, and it's all going to work out regardless, right? So doesn't mean we all have to succeed, we all have to sell out, we all have to min out. Like, nope. Just that one little thing. Are you convicted in what you're doing to that extent that even if the sky falls and something goes wrong and it doesn't live up to your expectations, would you still be able to explain why then? If yes, hell yeah.
That's great. That's really great. That's a good way to think about, like, for example, I launched a coin in the pre-sale meta called NOS, which is a nostalgia coin. The preservation of nostalgia using the blockchain was the idea. Kind of like the book of memes for nostalgia. Not a derivative of Bohm, but instead, like the idea from Bohm was like to keep the memes in a place. And I was like, what if we could preserve the nostalgia that we've all lived, but we don't really have tangible? And, we had like $3 million raised in the pre-sale. It was intense. We had millions of impressions on the tweet. And we closed the pre-sale off. We launched. It went up to like 20 million and then down fast. It went down like a rocket ship. And I dealt with so much scrutiny and intense like death threats, people hitting me up being like, dude, like you need to do something, like telling me all different directions. And the thing I learned most from it was truly like, you have to keep that mission top of mind of like what you were trying to do. And if it doesn't work out because it's based on the price going down, you know, you still like have to understand like, why did you do it? And if someone asks me, why'd you do it? It's this for the same reason, to preserve the nostalgia. And now there's even still things working behind the scenes right now of like, I'm figuring out how actually we can use the blockchain to preserve our nostalgia, speaking with different people in the community, taking it away from my own art and more so focusing on actual nostalgia, like not just drawn from my memory, but like everybody's photos from the internet, like using that to somehow cement it on the blockchain, on chain. And, you know, it's still something I'm incredibly passionate about, besides the idea of it having intense volume or high price. I feel like that's a good example of like, you know, something not going the exact way you want it to, but you still have to persist. Like, I know so many people from that tiny time where like people launched these pre-sales and then they just disappeared because they don't know what to say to people anymore if price goes down, besides to either apologize or try to appease everyone. And it's a tricky space to be a part of, you know? So it's like, you have to really like be here because you want to do something cool and not worry as much about like what people are going to think. You have to really be convicted in your own self. And it's just an interesting thing, you know? I don't think we've really had any type of thing that's similar to this, besides, when I think of it, video games. I mean, people that launch video games take insane scrutiny. They spend years and tens of millions of dollars, like Cyberpunk 2077. You know, I don't know if you're familiar with how that happened, but, you know, without going crazy into it, they received intense scrutiny after being the most hyped game of all time. And they launched and had all these bugs and everyone hated them, and they fixed it and smoothed it out, but they still, like, people still dislike them. And it's just about, okay, well, you know, are they going to stop making video games now? No, they're still making dope shit. They're still working on cool shit. And like, you have to take that attitude, like continue making dope shit, do it because you wanted to do it for the reason that you did.
Yep.
And like, boom, just keep going, make dope shit. Like, that's what the blockchain offers us, is that opportunity to preserve cool shit. And we've never really had this opportunity, and it is the Wild West. It's very new. So yeah, I mean, you know, I get fired up just thinking about how much opportunity that we have now for artists and creators that did not exist before this whole thing happened with NFTs. Like, when can you sell art to people all over the world without having to leave your house? Like, I mean, it's just opened up so many doors. And I think still people are realizing that now.
I think that's an incredibly important thing to say over and over and over again. It's like we get lost oftentimes as a community in discussions about royalties, which are incredibly important. Don't get me wrong. Discussions about royalties, discussions about, you know, best practices and behaviors and etc. But the root premise of it all, under it all, is the ability to own a digital asset.
Yeah.
And like that's all you kind of need to move forward into an entirely different future that we're creating day over day. Now you stack up, and then of course, then engage in the relevant conversations and try to build the best possible world that you want to be a part of and that you believe others want to be a part of. But never lose sight that like under our feet is that base value proposition, which is so incredibly important, and that in the early 2000s did not exist.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really unique times. And, you know, seeing the experimentation and the different metas of sorts that form, and, you know, seeing meme coins now feel like NFTs from 2021. It feels a more efficient, less bullshit type of way of people to gamble and speculate on stuff. And I think it's cool. I think it's super fun. And I love to see the art side also take on its own growth outside of all the speculation in PvP. Art for the sake of art, and the people still here creating it are truly in a different league now. So like, I think that as time goes on, you know, I want to ask you, like, how do you feel that in the next 5-10 years, digital art will be appreciated? Do you see it to become something that there are more museums and more, you know, art appreciators around the world? Or do you see that maybe like we could go other directions? Like, what is your take based off everything that you see on a day-to-day basis now? Where do you think we're headed?
Just think there's this inevitability. And I think that's the word. I think it's the word that represents why a number of us are here. It feels inevitable. It feels inevitable that of course, digital art will become is just art and will become the new contemporary art. And that's just how it's going to go. As the world goes digital, it will just continuously rise in prominence at its own pace. No one can guarantee the time scale of that, right? It's the same way that people wanted to live in a metaverse in 2021, but the tech wasn't ready. Okay, so then you have to wait longer. You need people to do bigger and better things with the tech until we get to a point in time where, yeah, mixed reality is another thing that feels inevitable, right? And sort of where mixed reality and accessible digital frame tech is another very interesting things. You see, big shout out to someone like White Walls bridging the gap, right? They're working on sort of bridging that gap. And that gap could take a long, like an empire can be built in that gap. White Walls can become an empire because accessible, beautiful digital frame tech may take another decade to produce. I don't know, 5 years, whatever, but they can build their own empire in the interim and be at the lead of that when it comes. And I think that's super cool. But when we have the mixed reality, when we have the accessible frame tech, when it's pervasive in our lives, then it's just art. And I think it's fun, and it's impossible to know exactly how we're going to get there and exactly the twists and turns that are going to take place in the short and the midterm. But again, if you have the right mindset, you can find joy in that, right? In that uncertainty. It's like you root yourself in the long-term inevitability, and you just put your head down and do your best to stay agile on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. And ideally you're here when that inevitability hits.
Yeah, that's very interesting, talking about the frames. And also, I do believe and agree, like, digital art is inevitable because of the simple idea of the tech being able to show that I own this. I bought it from the artist. Like, it's on the blockchain. It's there. It's a ledger that shows everything that's happened. It's just the better way, I think, for keeping track of this stuff, for building community, for sharing work. And everybody's got their, Black Mirror in their pocket nowadays, that we all are constantly, we have all these devices around us. White Walls bridging those gaps is incredible. And then, you see also like Samsung stepping in. They've been working on it for a while. LG, I guess, or was it Samsung or LG? I might be getting confused right now. Basically, I don't know if you know which, but
you're thinking of LG? They're doing the releases with a couple artists in NFT now.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know why I was thinking Samsung. Well, I mean, basically
stuff too. Like they're all poking at it.
Yeah, because it's like they have all these TVs all over the world, right? So it's like, why wouldn't we display art on them? And it makes sense because they're everywhere already. People want to display art. Digital art is native to these TVs, and it would make sense, right? But then I was talking with Ben Strauss from Transient. We had him on the show. Hasn't released yet, but he really gave an interesting take. Very, very interesting. He's like, I think that art from NFTs, like digital art, is going to trend into this like Spotify for NFTs. Like White Walls could technically, which they already are, allowing people to display art they don't own. I own a token frame, so I use it. Like, I like to buy art so I can display it on that frame. But if I could display anything on there, it would drastically change my collecting behaviors probably. Like, I would still want to collect stuff for the provenance and because I believe in an artist, or to appreciate someone's work and own it and physically, like, in my head at least, collect. But for the idea of displaying in my home, whether for a little get together or just for me and my partner to enjoy, it's something that is interesting to think about. Like, do you think that we will head towards a Spotify for digital art where you'll pay a monthly subscription, you'll be able to display all these editions from all over these different artists? And if that does happen, will that affect the way that people purchase art?
I think it's a good question. I think there's a great polarization going on right now. It's like the few and the rare, and the widely accessible and the not so rare. And ideally, in an ideal world, those two things can support one another. I don't think the human desire to own is going to go away. I think humans are wired to collect. And when they have the means to, they're wired to want to spend more and sort of collect different and rarer things. And that sort of tiers up until It just
Right.
continues to tier up depending upon the level someone's at. So I do think there's a way in that future where that future world can be structured where even if it is an infamous artwork that, let's say, the owner or the artist of those artworks are tied in some way, shape, or form, it is perpetuated all across the globe, but you still have a very desirable, at its heart, imagine people all over the world looking at that piece of artwork. Hey, who owns that artwork? I'm able to get that information, right? That information is present to me. And then it provides that sort of joy of collecting and of status symbology and like all that stuff that collector may care about at the end of it. Everyone collects for a different reason, right? But an ideal future does not lose the connection between those two things. That something can go far and wide, but it's still very clear who, at the end of the day, who has collected that or who has ownership over such a thing.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. I think that gives me more optimism around like the future of collecting, because when I had that conversation with Ben, I was like, damn, I kind of left that conversation like, what's the point of all of this? Like, obviously for the provenance, obviously for, the movement and all of that. But like, if we're really trending towards a Spotify for digital art, a monthly subscription to basically have all this art, like, I mean, maybe that's the most efficient way for people to display stuff that they want to see. But like, I feel like it kind of skips over this idea of why it's all happening to begin with. But maybe they can all exist because the appreciators will appreciate and the appreciators will want to collect. And maybe we see now the art appreciators are here and they're collecting and they're not going to stop because of some way that they could display art otherwise without owning it. Because the fact of owning those really cool pieces, owning a one of one from Die with the Most Likes, even if somebody can display all of his work in white walls.
Well, but I think it's critical to understand sort of how you get from point A to point B, right? Where you're always going to have somebody with the ability to possess a piece of frame technology that can either hack the frame technology or the frame technology is open to let you just put whatever you want on there. That's always going to be the case. It's the same thing with someone just, wanting to right click save as and has no care in the world about ownership or what any of that stuff means. No accreditation. They don't give a shit, right? At the end of the day. But then you're going to have, the other side of things. And if you think about it, it's like a frame tech company who is doing things the right way and concerned with legalities, right? And of course, the global brands will be concerned with these things. They won't have the ability to make it seamless and streamlined for anyone to just, hey, go to our catalog and select any Die with the Most Likes. No, Die with the Most Likes will have to consent to that. And so Die and white wall, right? So there will have to be a consent there. There will have to be an accreditation there. There will have to be, in the future, as this gets more and more popular, if there is a Spotify, there will have to be a contract there. That's where everything works together. Let people who have no care in the world and are going to hack it anyway, there's always that small segment of the population. Let them be pirates, crack down when you feel is necessary, but just kind of rule them out. Work on those pipelines. Then the best possible worlds, like how do you speed run the Mona Lisa, right? Why is the Mona Lisa arguably the most famous artwork in the world? Well, it's known by everyone. How does it get known by everyone? Well, it can't sit in an art vault. It can't sit in one person's ledger. It has to get out there. So the owner, theoretically, let's say Seed Phrase buys the Mona Lisa. Congratulations, Seed Phrase, right? What is he going to theoretically want out of that artwork? Like let's say, he either wants to collect it for the long haul, or maybe he has a thought, hey, in 10 years, if this evolves in a beautiful fashion, maybe I will part with it to somebody at the end of the day. What will he want to happen in the interim? Get it out there. Get it out there in front of people's eyes, in front of people's screens, with the proper accreditation, with people understanding what their view is, not just like in a non-screensaver where I don't know who this artist is. Take it through the right means and then get it global. And that's how that's going to get speed run. That's why you're seeing, to some extent, people able to achieve, confluence of factors, but achieve a $69 million sale of the 5,000.
Yeah.
We're going to see that again, right? We're going to see a tens of millions of dollar sale come again, and it's going to happen a lot faster than anything ever happened in human history. And I think it's pretty fun to think about why. like why something like that happens and all of the variables that go into it.
Yeah. Wow. That almost gives it more value from the creator side or the collector side as well. Both, actually. The collector, if somehow it was like, hey, owned by seedphrase.eth, bottom right corner in fine print, I mean, that's a huge flex, right? Millions of people seeing that. Talking with the guys from White Walls, Devin, we had on the pod, an early episode, he told me about some alpha of like tracking time displayed for art. I mean, imagine if there is a Spotify for artists, like that technically could be a great generator of income for artists as well. So, you know, I do really like those takes. And I know we're on just about 80 minutes in. This has been incredible. I do have a couple more questions for you if you
Please.
have some time, because I want to talk about narrative. Narrative is a really, really cool side of art, right? Because looking at art is one thing, seeing it, it looks great, it's aesthetically awesome. But I do believe, obviously, narrative is, if not more important than the aesthetic, an incredibly key part of it. So like I was at a Dali museum recently, and I was reading, and they have like it set up in a way that's kind of chronological. So you go through and it's kind of like Dali's first work that they've could manage to get scribbled on a piece of paper. And he's like 12 or something when he made it. But before that, even it talks about the people who collected all these works and who they were and why they did it. So like when they started collecting all of his work, he wasn't as big as he is today, but they kind of created the narrative for him to become as big as he is by championing him in a way that creates the narrative for his work. So Dali, they'd only met him maybe once or twice for a few minutes to have a drink at a bar or at an event. They ran into him. And like, but meanwhile, they did so much work to make him who he is today, essentially. Not all of it, obviously, because he made the art, but like writing the essays and doing the analysis and connecting the dots and sharing it and creating a museum based around the works that they've collected and mostly own 80% of the work in there, outside of huge works donated by like Bank of America, things like that, priceless works, huge one-of-one giant works. Outside of like those, I mean, I was thinking about it, like the artist like Van Gogh, I mean, he barely sold any work his whole life. And then his sister-in-law, basically, his brother's wife, after him and his brother passed away, his brother's wife was like, I have this attic full of art. I want to champion it. I want to make it amazing. My husband, in that case, her husband, literally dedicated a lot of his life to supporting Van Gogh. So she was like, I don't want this to go to waste. Now that they're both gone, I want to make that happen. And she did. Her name's, I believe, Jane Van Gogh Bonger. Might be butchering that. But ultimately, the story remains that the narrative is so key. So I'm curious on like, from all of the analysis and understanding that you have, and I would argue to say you are probably the most tapped in, locked in person in the art space to understand everything that's happening. How important is narrative? And do you see like narratives forming with artists like ACK, for example, getting into these gallery like areas and setting up these things like the pianos blossoms that he just did? I can see the similarities between like maybe 50 years from now, 60 years. There could be a museum for ACK like there is for Dali. Like there may be a museum for Xcopy. But I would even argue that ACK is kind of steps ahead of Xcopy in that direction, because Xcopy is more back. He's not as involved. He's not doxed and all of that. And there's nothing wrong with that. I love that too. And I think that's part of crypto art. But, you know, I want to ask you, like, how important is narrative? And do you see any of these parallels yourself?
Oh, it's huge. It's hugely important. It actually ties back to something we were talking about a little further. It takes this to the next level, but we talked about how communication is essential for an artist coming in to think, hey, will my art stand alone? It probably will not.
Right.
And it ties into the social communication. What you're now looping in, it takes the social communication up a notch. And it says, not just how I communicate on a day-to-day basis, not just how I might tell person A about my artwork, but how I can put resources in place, ideally stories in place, contextualizations in place that can last, and that ideally can stack upon themselves and become something even greater. I think that's narrative is everything. Now, a narrative can be that you are a super mysterious anonymous artist, and that can work as a story basis, but then you need more stacked on top. You use the example of Xcopy. I actually would say Xcopy is one of the best at adding narrative, and here's why. Xcopy is the best, at least tied one, artist website. You can go to Xcopy's website, and you can get a gallery view, a chronology, and almost like a financial line item view of his work. And you can seamlessly toggle among those three things. And so what that shows me is a deep understanding of the people who may be interacting and what they may want to get their hands on. And you can immediately click out from that beautiful contextualization of 7 years of artwork and immediately get out to the marketplaces, the appropriate places to engage with it, collect it, take it to the next level. And Xcopy runs a Discord and runs it very, very well. And is not always in there, is not talking, necessarily on the day-to-day, but is popping in and out, does have it managed, has the appropriate channels, understands, I think, at a deep level, how communication takes place and how to foster that when those types of moments come. So I think Xcopy seems to me to have a beautiful handle on his narrative as, yes, an anonymous, storied crypto artist, but when the rubber meets the road, he's got a Lamborghini in the current time and place. Now, to speak to another, other artists out there are resources at play there. That is not just one human being executing and operating all of the above. Resources do matter, and I imagine that there's some help there, and that's a beautiful thing to witness, and it's something maybe that, aspirationally people can look at and say, hey, that's a hell of a resource. What can I do today, and how can I work towards something that holds someone's hand through my work? You mentioned someone, ACK, one of the best communicators out there. I think when you talk, in a different fashion, Dark Farms has a way. We talked about Dark Farms earlier in the Bone world, and just like seamless navigation of that. It seems like it comes second nature. ACK, a bit more of a performance artist. I think ACK has sort of this persona that he's able to produce these PvP mixed with art mechanisms and yet show an outright disdain for the PvP side. He's able to set it up, but his narrative is, I don't care about that. But there very clearly is at least some care and ability to put those types of things in motion. And I think it's a really interesting juxtaposition. He's got a very unique lane. It began as performance art, and I think he's evolved. I think his art has gotten better and better and better. In fact, I will say this. I think I've been the most impressed I've ever been with ACK from a pure art perspective is what he was just able to effectuate at the crossroads of physical and digital with Avant Art. I think my eyes have slowly over the course of these years been open more and more and more. It's like, holy shit, this guy's evolving. Like he is evolving real time in front of our eyes. And he has that innate understanding of the time and place that we're in. And you see him building two very interesting things real time. He's building a metaverse, digital, whatever you want to frame it up as, museum. And I believe he's doing that with Young Weekend. And it's just this beautiful muse-like, white walls and frames, and it looks gorgeous. And he just seems to be putting the pieces in place to where someone can walk into his digital home and view the artwork in exactly the way that he wants you to view it. And physically has just shared photos, and it seems like the Muse Factory is in progress. And it's similar to Fuckrender in Montreal. These guys are building physical spaces to house their artwork, their studio. They can use that to cut content. They can use that to create art in. They can use that to invite the outside world into their physical homes. And I think that's a really interesting thing. You take that in the same way Xcopy leads the website world, Beeple leads the studio world, but you see these other artists doing similar things in their own way at their own scope and scale. And to get back to your original point, all of the above is they're controlling their own narrative, and they're exciting others to pick it up and to run with it further than they can.
hour. That was really well put. I do agree on the X copy part as well. His website, it's bar none the best website that I've seen for an artist. I love timeline style, but also then incorporating the financialized aspect of literally line item, line item, line item of all the works chronologically, how it happened. Another very interesting thing about Xcopy as well, which I don't know if you've gone deep down into these archives, but I'm sure you would absolutely love it if you have not, is his Tumblr archive. And just going all the way back to the beginning and seeing the notes and like all the stuff that like he's just basically like peeking out into the void. Like at certain points, he's like, nobody's buying my art, nobody cares. Like he didn't say those exact words, but it's like he's basically pinging into the void. And you can just see like how it evolved and how people started to care and how like he's like, oh, I sold my first artwork today. You can even see posts of his where he's like, hey, selling my art. You can even track it back to Reddit, like posts on Reddit. You can track back so far. And I think it's so cool to witness that. So cool. What a guy. I mean, amazing. I think we're living in such an amazing time right now to where this is all still so early on. And like when you do look back at this, if the earth is still here, like whatever, I mean, 200 years from now, where will art be then? And I don't think there is enough conversation around where will it be 100 years from now? How will it be preserved? Do we take for granted that the blockchain is going to be the way that it's preserved? Like known origin, you know, X copy, basically that's an example right there. I mean, like known origin goes down. Not all of these businesses will be able to stay afloat. Will shape stay afloat to where all that art still exists? Like these are not cheap things to run an L2, right? So it's just really interesting. And I'm really obsessed with the idea of the preservation of it all. And that's why too, I have so much respect for what you're doing, which is so cool. You're truly preserving the day to day, all of this shit that gets lost. And I'm sure even too, as your business and company grows, maybe it expands to not just art. Maybe you have like a Roger Dickerman, but like a miniature Roger Dickerman doing it for meme coins or doing it for like the other sectors, gaming, as your company and umbrella grows over the next decade, right? I think it's brilliant to witness. And, you know, shout out to ACK, shout out to Xcopy, shout out to Young Weekend, another awesome MFer. Man, I mean, you know, as we kind of lean towards wrapping up, I want to ask you about what's next. I know we talked a little bit about what's next for 24 Hours of Art. We kind of teased a little bit, but I know in our chat prior, we kind of timed this recording in a certain way. Is there anything that you want to talk about that's in the near future?
So in a way, 24 Hours of Art, going back to the magic of it, right? We have the bottom brick. It doesn't exist without those day-to-days, right? Keeping our finger on the pulse and being able to deliver that to somebody else in a way that ideally you can read that through in a couple minutes, right? Seamless, move on with your day, but have a better understanding of it for it. But the magic of it and what I think takes us into the future, and it goes back to the narrative point we just made about everything. Everything is a narrative, right? The magic of the story. That's what I'm really interested in. I'm not interested in evolving 24 Hours of Art into, like, for example, we just partnered with a company called Article. Article is creating the Bloomberg of digital art, right? So they're very specifically crafting, you know, they have brilliant engineers. They're crafting the Bloomberg of digital art that somebody can go get immersed in the numbers, approach it from a very financialized perspective. And I think that that's needed because there will be plenty of people who want to go at it from that perspective and go that deep. What I'm interested in building is something that captures the magic of the space between story and numbers, right? You could say the art, its market, and its stories. That's what 24 Hours of Art is. So speaking of the best stories and how this is timed, telling a very, very fun story about Beeple. It's his 4-year anniversary. 4 years ago, his first drop came out. And I think it's a beautiful moment to go back to for a couple of reasons. One, it was when everything got sent off into hyperdrive on the art side. And I think you could point to just a few inflection points with him being the biggest one. But in this story, there's another one that preceded it that I bet a lot of people are unaware of, and that's Trevor Jones's Bitcoin Bull. that came out several months prior, and that actually directly inspired Beeple's Politics is Bullshit. And he is quick to credit it. He goes right back to Trevor, and it's a beautiful little link. And so just going back in that time, Nifty Gateway, one of the first surges into the space, collector base explosion, crossover into fiat, something I think is mind-blowing that we're not back there. And I think the next, sort of maybe art wave that welcomes a bunch of new collectors in almost has to have that mechanism in there, which I think that's very interesting to take a look at as to how that played out in 20 and 21. So we looked at Nifty Gateway, Trevor Jones, Beeple's first release, and then, of course, all the craziness that followed. So it's an honor and a privilege to be able to tell these types of stories, and all the people that contributed to it, just going out and tapping all of these critical individuals, co-founder of Nifty Gateway, Griffin Cockfoster, Trevor Jones himself, Beeple himself, Darlington CEO of MonsterCat, who got one of the initial $1, Loopify, who has the all-time high secondary sale of Politics is Bullshit, and of course Pablo Fraile, who bought both one of ones when $66,000 each. Now you think October 2020, Pablo collected both one of ones of Beeple's first release, each for $66,000 plus. That at that time was a tremendous amount. That was unheard of in the space. It was basically Trevor's bull, which was 55, and then those two Beeple pieces that were 66 and change each. Unheard of that would happen at that time. It turned heads, it got headlines, and sort of the rest is history. And then talk more recently to Raoul Powell of Real Vision, who has come in and developed like a very strong thesis on Beeple and on what culture means and how all this walks forward. So I had a great time talking to him about his thesis. And last but definitely not least, how could I forget the legend Coldy giving Beeple key advice prior to his first release. And Colby was kind enough to talk for an extended period of time about some of the advice he gave, how he perceived that release, and how things have walked forward till today. So just having a chance to bake all those voices into what I call an oral history, not unique terminology to me. It's been used in sports and journalism for a long time, but essentially me being the vessel, just this narrator where I can step back and I can just set the stage. And then my role becomes cutting and crafting these voices almost as if they're talking to one another, even though they weren't in the same room for this article. And I just can't wait for people to read it, get their hands on it, hopefully learn a few things, like especially if you weren't around in the summer of 2020, like take a trip back through this time machine, right, and kind of see how things walked forward to present day.
Man, that's so sick. I think that you're in such a uniquely amazing position. Your skill set is perfect for it. I couldn't think of a better person to be pushing forward in this same way with exactly what you're doing. It's incredible to witness, and I love being a part of this space and getting to connect with people like you who are really pouring in the energy from your heart, not thinking about all this other stuff. It's like the way you explain that is so cool because you really are the vessel for it. And that's such an amazing part of getting to do something in this space when you're genuinely in it for your heart is in it. You're in it for the art, right? I mean, like you really are. And that's so sick. I'm looking forward to seeing that, and it's going to be incredible. And the people that you're mentioning, I mean, Pablo Fraile having the conviction to buy Beeple in that early stage, it all leading together. Like, I mean, even them leading into the biggest CryptoPunk sales, the first ones like G Money buying the ape, and like people being like, wow, like what the hell is going on here? It's all these kind of little dominoes that end up creating these larger things. But, at the end of the day, like, the storytelling of it all and having the chance to leverage the blockchain in some regard to show like, hey, this isn't just a story. Like this actually happened and it's provable. Mm-hmm. That is different than like, this might be a stretch for some people to compare it to, but like the Bible, stories in the Bible. I mean, there's no blockchain that's like, hey, this happened and this happened and then this happened. There's no way to trace it. It's just so far gone in a different direction. And this is something different. It's like you're really getting to narrate these stories in a uniquely relevant way that keeps them, preserves them, makes them relevant forever. And they are some of the most important stories of our space. So huge credit to you. Huge.
Thanks, man. I want your feedback when it comes out. It's
I'd love it.
It's
I'd love to see it.
Sometimes sure you could feel this with certain interviews, certain pieces of content, certain artworks that you create, where you can feel sometimes it's different. Sometimes that kinetic energy is like it's crackling. You could feel it. Maybe that's just because it's special to you. Maybe, to use a word of yours, maybe that's just because it's nostalgic, right? And it's like really tripping off those key elements. And maybe it's just personal at the end of the day. But the best narratives, the best stories end up tripping that off in others. And so I'm very curious, especially I have a lot of friends, you included, who are around, right? And like kind of remember some of those times and have lived through it all and are right here present day. New presidential cycle in the US, 4 years later, this piece that both homages the history of crypto art that came before it, as well as the political scene and climate that's only gotten, I don't know, I think more on the nose.
Turbulent.
Right? As time has gone, it feels meaningful. And I don't know that anyone, it was too early maybe to make that declaration then, but I think it's indisputable now. People globally, probably one of the two most relevant digital artists, period, end of story. And I think plenty of people would say, corner to corner of the globe, maybe the first. And I think it's amazing to look back when that person said, okay, I've learned enough about this technology and I'm ready to bring my 13 plus years of every single day. I'm ready to take that and I'm ready to bring it here. And I'm choosing to do so in this manner. That, to me, like, I don't know that will ever get any less special for me. And I think I speak for a few.
Yeah, man. And you're playing your part in really making that cemented and making those stories accessible, not just among a collector group or like a group of people who were there or a group of people who are kind of in the know. Like, you're making this accessible to everybody. And that's beautiful. Like, that's something that will go down in history, and it's amazing. So again, man, huge respect and all credit deserved where credit's due. Like, I'm stoked to see it unfold. So, and I know too, it's just kind of the beginning. Like you said, there will be more of these situations. How will those dominoes fall? Right. Absolutely incredible. As we begin to wrap up, I want to ask you this this last question. It's kind of switching gears a bit. But to me, you're very locked in. You're very on the ball. And like you said, you wake up at 4 a.m. between 4 and 5. Like, what gets you as like physically to be so on point? Like, do you have any like biohacks? Are you like one of those people who likes to do biohacking, or do you stay fit, like exercising every day? Or like, do you have anything to say about like how to stay on point when you're on a mission?
It's a great question. My career prior is fitness and wellness. So the answer to your question is, I know all the right things to do. And if I'm truthful, which I will be, I don't always do them. And that's a very strange thing to say because I did them for quite a long time, a lot of years. But the space that we are in and trying to push for something that oftentimes has no precedent and believing in the inevitability, right? But allowing yourself to sort of spend a lot of time in socials and day to day, you could sort of feel palpably, the ebbs and the flows of that. It's very challenging from a health perspective. And so if I were to give the good advice that I don't always take, it's, bedtime is everything. Trying to, like, 4 to 5 only works for the long haul when you're in bed at a certain time on the front. Otherwise it'll all break, right, eventually. So I think it's just sort of matching what you want out of one side. It's like I believe in a control the bookends philosophy. This is something that I believed in all throughout my fitness and wellness career, as far as the closest I can come to giving you a great like sort of biohacker tip. Control the bookends, because our days are likely pure chaos at times. We may have meetings and interviews where I get to shut off everything and engage with you for 2 hours. But outside of that, it's often pure chaos. We often have multiple tabs, windows, a phone, a this, or that, or the other. And it's easy and it's forgivable to just completely lose sight of a literal entire day, right? It's happened to, I believe, all of us at one point in time or another. but the bookends are something that you can always control. When your eyes open for the first time in the morning, hopefully it's not like a text message or something, or hopefully you have notifications off at night, right? I think that would be step one. But when your eyes open in the morning, it's either of your own volition, and then you're in complete control, or it's an alarm clock, in which case, you got to maybe a little bit bleary-eyed and sort of, but you can control sort of the first steps that you take of the day. So what I do personally is I have a coffee ritual, and I am that coffee snob. I'm that guy. I drink, usually, if I'm at my best, it's 1 cup a day, but I'm doing it the way that I want. And really, even more than it just being pure coffee snobbery, it's a way for me to take 10 to 15 minutes and pour fresh beans and grind the beans and boil the water. I do the slow pour over. And what is all of that? It's giving me space. It's giving me 10 to 15 minutes where I'm just like kind of walking and taking steps and opening the cabinets and taking the bean. I have this tactile, physical world, right, sensation, and I'm controlling that bookend to the point where I'm taking the first scent and sip, and then I'm going to sit down, and then I'm going to begin my journey. And that 10 to 15 minutes from just like a sanity check, repeat over and over perspective, it means the world. And then the flip side that I don't always get right, you can do the same thing at night. And if I'm at my best, those last 10, 15, 30, whatever minutes, if I'm at my best, I'm going to be spending that in quiet conversation with my wife. I'm going to be, doesn't have to be formal meditation, right? But just chilling, breathing, away from the screen, right? Away from the phone, again, away from those notifications. If nothing else, just control the bookends and get notifications out for 15 and 15. I think even just that can rock your world in the best of ways. So I guess that's my piece. Control your bookends.
Damn. Powerful, man. I haven't heard that before. I mean, of course, the concept of in the morning, have a ritual, at night, have a ritual, but I think that simplifies it, boils it down even further. And, I do enjoy a great pour over every single morning as well. I don't make it myself though, but I do walk down the road or drive, depending. And I go with my partner. We go every single morning. We go get our coffee, and then we spend like a little bit of time together, and usually about 5-10 minutes literally before we both dive into our own respective routines. Mm-hmm. That is such a hack for me. So like, I'd love to hear that as well. Like, it just works. I mean, controlling your bookends, it's a good way to get your day in alignment. So man, that was great. And dude, thank you so much for coming on here. This has been an incredible talk. Time has absolutely melted on by, and I look forward to hearing this again, listening back through, and to staying in the loop as well on everything you're doing. And I'd love to take a look at the narration of it all after you're done with the oral history of the recent stories that you're putting together here regarding what we spoke on. Overall, man, this has been incredible. Thank you so much for coming through. You're definitely in at 5 the art. There's no doubt about that.
Let's go. Keep doing what you're doing. Somewhere around what, interview 30, you said? Somewhere in that ballpark?
Yeah. I think we're at like 31 now, but 26 have been published.
Let's go. Okay. So my request is, if it makes sense in your context, in your own narrative, keep doing what you're doing long enough so we could do this again.
Hell yeah, dude. I would love to have you back on anytime that you're doing something you'd want to talk about, or just even have another conversation. The door is absolutely always open for you, man. So hell yeah, and I appreciate that. Hell yeah. All right, man. Well, let's wrap this one. Thanks again for coming through, Roger. You're the fucking man, and Godspeed. I'll talk to you soon, man.